Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at troubleshooting inter-VLAN routing. We'll be discussing common inter-VLAN issues, missing VLANs, switch trunk port issues, switch access port issues, and finally, router configuration issues. This episode is part of my series on switching, routing, and wireless essentials. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. One of the most common problems with inter-VLAN routing is the physical layer, is where you actually have your cables plugged into, that they're not completely plugged in, they're plugged into the wrong port. That's the first thing I suggest you check. That's the first thing I check when I do have a problem with my inter-VLAN routing, is to make sure that my cables are in, that my cables are all in my trunk ports and they're all working there. That's probably the number one area where you're going to have issues. Now, if your layer one is all correct, your physical layer, then here are some things you can do. Here are 4 of the most common issue types we have: missing VLANs, switch trunk port issues, access port issues, and then routing configuration issues. Missing VLANs, we can go in and use the show VLANs, that make sure that it'll list out all the VLANs we have here. Show interfaces switch port, it'll show us the information about each port, what VLANs they belong to. And then we can just use the ping command to make sure that we're actually pinging the devices to see, is it working or not? Odds are ping isn't going to give you a whole lot of information more than it's working or it's not, but it'll at least let you know that you have to look into it further. If we got some switch port, there's some switch trunk port issues, 2 commands we can use here definitely are the show interface trunk and the show running config. The show interface trunk gives you information about the trunks themselves, if they're up, they're running, what modes they're in. The show running gives us how it's currently configured in RAM and how it's set up. If we have some switch access port issues, we can do the show interfaces switch port. It's going to give us all detailed information about each switch port. We can see what our running config is. Show running config interface gives us all the information about our interfaces. We can see how those are set up, see if they're access ports, see what VLANs they're connected to, see if they're shut down. Then IP config, we can issue that in a command prompt in a Windows box to make sure that we have all the IP information correct there. And finally, router configuration issues, making sure that we have all the router correctly, all the routing configured correctly on our device, on our layer 3 switch, on our routers, depending upon if we're doing router on a stick or layer 3 switching. We can do a show IP interface brief, gives us a nice little table, gives us the interface, gives us our status, gives us an IP address if we have one associated there. We can also give us the show interfaces, where it lists out a lot of the information. Now, this diagram we're going to use as an example here as we work through some of the issues and problems that we have. And it's the same diagram we've been using throughout this whole episode. Missing VLANs could definitely be a problem you run into. Now, this could be caused by if the VLAN was never created. You got busy and you thought you created it, but you actually never did. So it was just never created. Maybe you accidentally deleted it. You were going to delete VLAN 20 and instead you deleted VLAN 30 by accident. You deleted that. Or for some reason across the trunk, by default across the trunk link, all VLANs go across that trunk. But what if that VLAN you're trying to work with isn't allowed across there? Maybe you have a security policy that says, okay, we're going to keep the HR traffic from going across this trunk link, and you're trying to access a port on the far side of that in the HR VLAN, and you're blocking that. And so there's a number of different reasons why you'd have some missing VLANs. Now, when a VLAN is deleted, the ports that are in it become inactive. This example right here, we did a show interface fast Ethernet 06 switch port, and it gives us information about our fast Ethernet switch port, and it says it's set as a static, it's running as a static. We're using .1Q. But down here, it says access mode VLAN is 10, and then it's inactive. What that means to me is this Fast Ethernet 06 is assigned to VLAN 10, but VLAN 10 does not exist. Now what you got to do is go in and create VLAN 10. It'll become active then, or reassign this to a different VLAN. Here's our topology again. Once again, just a reminder of what we're looking at. If you like this episode on troubleshooting inter-VLAN routing and you get value out of it, and of course, depending upon what platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. Doing this supports the channel, which in turn helps me bring you more great content. Subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell. You can visit my website at KevTechify.com for all of my details and how to get these episodes in video and podcast form. Another issue we could have is misconfigured ports on our switches. They could be set up as access ports and they're supposed to be trunks. One issue we have is misconfigured switch ports on a legacy inter-VLAN. Could be when you assign a connecting router to the wrong VLAN, and so you have some sort of communications that's happening, but they're looking at different 802.1q tagging, and so it's not making sense. When it doesn't make sense, they just drop the frames. When we're dealing with router on a switch, a lot of times one of your most common issues is a misconfigured trunk port, where that port is not configured correctly, specifically on the switch, and for whatever reason it wasn't set up correctly. Here on a switch, we did a show interface trunk, and we can see that the mode is on, so we turned it on. We have our encapsulation of 802.1q. Our status is trunking, and we have our native VLAN set to 1. This is all important information that you need to have set correctly, and if looking at this, I would say that this is the correct information that we have. If you're still having problems with this, another thing you can look at is our show running config, and that will show you how your device is currently configured with the ports in question. And that was looking here at our trunk ports, and that would be these connections right here where the trunk comes into it. Primarily it's the switches. There's not a whole lot of configuration you do on the router besides creating the sub interfaces. Once you create the sub interfaces, you're sending multiple VLANs across there, but on the switches, that's where you need to make sure you have your trunk configuration set. Sometimes you're going to run into issues with your access ports. Couple things you can do here to help you do that is, first thing, look and see that your IP settings on your end device is correct. That's going to be usually one of the big problems there, is you set up your IP information correctly. You set the IP address wrong, you set the default gateway wrong, you set the subnet mask wrong. You set those up incorrectly and it's not able to work. Once you verified that, then I would go and I would look at the switch side of the connection. Some of the commands we can use here is the show interface, and then what interface it is, and then the switch port settings. That's what we have right here in this example. We have our name, we switch port, it's enabled. Then down here underneath the administrator mode and operational mode, we have it set as an access port. It is working as an access port. That's the difference between those two lines. Then down here, access mode VLAN, that this is part of VLAN 1, and that'll tell you what port it's in there. Also, show VLAN brief will give you a nice little table that lists out all your VLANs and the ports that are associated with them. You can quickly identify, hey, I have a port in the wrong VLAN. You can then go in and make your changes. And once again, the show running config command, if you do a show running config interface and then the interface number, it'll take you directly to the settings, how your device is configured in RAM. And what we're looking at here is like I said, the IP settings here on your PC, so the IP settings, and then the settings here on your access port. Looking and making sure that those are set correctly. That's what checking your access port is right here in this area. And one of the last main issues you're going to have is router configuration. And typically router configurations deal with the sub interfaces. When you're having problems doing inter-VLAN routing and you're starting to look at your router, I would always go and look at your sub interfaces right away. Now, the one command I use is the show IP interface brief. It gives you a nice table, nice layout of all of your interfaces, including sub interfaces. So it'll give you the name of your sub interface, give you what IP address, if any, is assigned to that one, and then it'll give you your status, up, up, down, down, there. And so you can get a quick picture on what it is. Another command I use here is the show interfaces. Now in this example, we use the show interfaces, but then we're going to filter that, and that's what this pipe sign is. That's the key above the enter key, but you have to use the shift. It's the vertical line. And then we're going to say we want to include anything that either has gig in it, or, and then once again, that's the pipe sign, but it doesn't have a space this time, or has 802.1q. And so we're going to show us the interfaces that either have gig or 802.1q in them. And as we can see here, gig Ethernet 000 is down, down. And so that's the physical interface of 000 is down. Then the physical interface here of 001. Now, how do I know it's the physical interface? There is no period with a number after it, identifying it as a sub interface. If there's no period and a number, this is the physical interface. And remember, if you're having sub interfaces, you have to turn the physical interface on. Here in this example, it is up and up, so that is working good. We're saying that we're doing 802.1q encapsulation right there, that we're doing that frame tagging right there. Virtual LAN ID is 1. Then we come down to our sub interfaces. Once again, it's on the physical interface of 001, but then we have a sub interface that .10 is up and up. And then we can see here that our encapsulation, we're doing the 802.1q tagging, and our VLAN ID is 100. If we remember, we're trying to keep this all the same. The sub interface, the VLAN number, and then what made the network address special. Well, this one here is a wrong VLAN ID. This is 100. It should be 10 in our scenario. And that's why we try and keep those the same, is you can easily identify the problem. If we look at the other ones, this is .20 on VLAN 20. Those all equal up. .99 on VLAN 99. Those are equal. And so this is going to cause us a problem because it's on the wrong VLAN. We need to go in there and fix that. And what we're looking at here is the configuration right here on this port, on the physical port and the sub interfaces. Once again, this is the sub interface information that is assigned there. And that last command we had, that show interface command, that's where we had an incorrect VLAN mentioned there. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on troubleshooting inter-VLAN routing. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and depending upon the platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com, and you can get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on switching, routing, and wireless essentials. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I picked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of my series on switching, routing, and wireless essentials. Once again, I'm Kevin. This here is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.